I'm Peter Taylor. I'm the Director of the Australian Research Centre for Excellence in Mathematical and Statistical Frontiers, ACEMS for short. And I'll be the host of today's webinar. And it's going to be presented by one of my colleagues at the University of Melbourne, Professor Kate Smith-Miles. Kate's a Professor of Applied Mathematics. She's a Chief Investigator with ACEMS and an Australian Laureate Fellow at the University of Melbourne. She's currently Associate Dean, Enterprise and Innovation, and she's just, well, a couple of months ago, heard that she put in an application for an Australian Research Council Industrial Transformation Centre for Optimisation Technologies, Integrated Methodologies and Applications, which was successful. So Kate's going to take up position as Director of that Industrial Transformation Centre. So just before inviting Kate to start, I just want to acknowledge that the traditional owners of the land on which I'm sitting and in which the University of Melbourne sits, which is the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and they've been the custodians of this land for thousands of years. I expect that there are people on other lands of other Indigenous communities logged in today, and I certainly would like to pay my respects to the elders past and present of those communities, and indeed Aboriginal elders of any communities that happen to be online today. So, without further ado, I'll ask Kate to, I'll transfer to her, and there will be questions and answers, but please use the question and answer button on the bottom of the screen, and I will moderate those at the end of the seminar. So thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for the opportunity to have a digital unveiling of this artwork known as Negentropy Triptych. We'll talk about what all that means soon. So here's the outline of what we're going to be talking about over the next 45 minutes. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the scientific motivation. Why did we generate this artwork? What was the mathematics behind these images, our aims, the method and the results, before jumping to talk about our artistic motivation. Why did we decide to turn this mathematics research into an artwork? You see, the thing is, this artwork was generated as an unexpected outcome of my ARC laureate mathematics research project. So we'll cover that, the mathematics lightly. We'll then take a whirlwind tour of the history, philosophy and science of aesthetics in 10 minutes. And in particular, the notion of beauty, what beauty means to a mathematician, because it's quite a specific thing. And then finally, we'll talk about the making of this artwork, both from an artistic endeavor perspective, as well as when we try and get an algorithm to do a similar thing. Okay, so let's jump straight into the scientific motivation. So what I'm interested in is, in my research, is algorithms and how we can learn to trust them. So algorithms guide machines to solve problems. And I don't care whether we're talking about an algorithm for face recognition or facial image analysis, or whether we're talking about algorithms that help you decide whether to buy or sell shares. In the end, the algorithm solves a problem and we humans listen to what the algorithm says and make decisions. And so it's really essential that we can figure out how we can trust an algorithm. So let's talk briefly about that, because that's been part of my motivation. So suppose we have an algorithm and we're trying to decide whether we trust it. Well, the way we do that is that we throw it some test examples where we know the answer. So you might give it test example number 1. And if the algorithm gets the right answer, you think, okay, was that a fluke? Let's try again. Another example, if it gets the right answer. And so it goes. And after a while, you might start to feel this algorithm can be trusted. It's getting the right answers to problems where you know the answer. And you may think that the algorithm is completely trustworthy, but if you search hard enough, you might find some examples where it actually starts to perform badly. And so it's really important that we make sure that we test thoroughly. And there might be another algorithm where straight away you see that it's performing poorly and you might be tempted to conclude that it's a pretty poor algorithm. But the fact is that every algorithm has strengths and weaknesses, and we have to try to figure out through choice of test examples, we have to figure out how we're going to expose strengths and weaknesses. And exposing these algorithm weaknesses depends on the diversity of the test examples that we choose. If we don't choose the right examples, we will never know. And so one of the challenges is to try to figure out what examples are going to reveal an algorithm's weakness. it's important to understand that randomly chosen examples may not actually be difficult for an algorithm. And so you could randomly choose test problems and get a false sense of security about an algorithm. I'm interested in whether or not we can get computers to search for examples that an algorithm actually can't solve, that an algorithm finds difficult. And essentially what I'm trying to do with my research is create a bit of a warning label that we might attach to an algorithm that says this algorithm is only reliable under the following circumstances. It should only be used for scenarios most similar to those described in the terms and conditions. That's what I'd love to see attached to every algorithm, is an understanding of when it should be used, when it's reliable, and how we've actually demonstrated that rigorously. So that's my scientific motivation. My original research field, and these ideas apply to any algorithm, algorithms in machine learning or optimization or facial image analysis, but my original background was in optimization. And so I've spent a lot of time applying these ideas to the algorithms that we have developed for solving optimization problems. So what do I mean by optimization? Basically, everyone's seen optimization before in high school. Here, I don't know if you can see it on the screen yet, but soon you will see.
It's coming up pretty quickly now, Kate.
Oh, great. That's good. That's good to know. Thank you, Peter. So here is a function. The blue line is a function. And you learned in high school that this is a function of one variable x. And depending on the value of x you choose, the function returns, f of x returns a certain value. And you learned in high school that if you set f of x equal to 0, you find the roots of the function where it passes through the axis here, shown with the triangles. And you also learned, if you did calculus, you learned that if you set the derivative equal to 0, you find the stationary points, the turning points here where the gradient is 0. This one here, where x is around 70, is a global minima. You can't get any lower than that. This one over here, where x is around 110, is a local minima. In its region, it's minimal, but it's not the lowest point overall. And we have a local maxima here as well. Okay, so everyone's seen optimization. Let me just tell you, the kinds of techniques you learn in high school aren't going to help you necessarily in the real world. They're just foundational. But what we're trying to do with optimization is find the value of x that minimizes f of x, the function that depends on x. And we have to watch out for the traps caused by local minima. We don't want to converge into a locally optimal solution when we could get a much better one. So in order to make this a little bit more concrete, let's suppose that this function arises from a retail, let's say a supermarket, and they're trying to decide, x is the decision of how many items of a particular product they stock on the shelves. And so there's some, and f of x is the cost of doing so. And obviously they want to minimize their costs or maximize their profit. Where the cost is negative down here, this is the profit zone. Up here, it's all just costing you stuff. But if the cost turns negative, now we're in the profit zone. And so you can see that this solution here, when x is around 90, is the point. They should have 90 items on the shelves so they can actually turn a profit. You might think that the more you have on the shelf, the bigger your profit. But no, in this case, suppose there's some initial startup cost. And then the more you start to sell, you make some money. But then there might be some leveling off here. And there might be a reason that it turns around. For instance, if you have too many items, maybe they're perishable and you actually can't sell them by the use by date and you have to throw them out, so that's a waste. Or maybe you have inventory costs where you can't actually keep them all on the shelves and you have to pay extra storage. So you might end up with a function that's looking quite nonlinear. So that is a function of one variable. Now, if you suppose you had two products, and of course, supermarkets don't have one or two products, they have hundreds of products. So you can imagine how complex these optimization problems become. But suppose you had two products now and you're trying to work out how many X's and how many Y's you need. Then you get this kind of 2D function where the third axis is your cost. And what I want to do is show you another way of looking at that. I want you to look at it now from above. So we have X and Y as our two dimensions, and the color is when you're looking at this function from above. And so the minimal points, the darkest blue, are shown here, and the maximum points are the red. And I want you to see this contour plot because the rest of the talk is all about contour plots and how we can use these images of functions to create artwork. So that's optimization in a nutshell. Now, in order to test optimization algorithms, we have well-known test examples. So here's a few of them. This function over here is kind of basic. Every optimization algorithm is going to very quickly roll down to the bottom of this valley and say, I have found the lowest point, the minimum of the function, the global min. That's an easy problem because of its convexity. This one over on the right is easy for most algorithms to roll down and find the lowest point, the darkest blue. But there is a bit of a plateau here, and some algorithms might get trapped in that plateau. They might think that they've converged, but there's actually a slightly darker blue further down. This one over here is horrendous, and most algorithms will find it hard because of how many local minima it has. They're just going to get trapped in one of them, and they're not even going to know that there was a better one further down because of the way algorithms search through the space. They're quite blind, quite myopic. And this one over here is also hard for most algorithms because most algorithms might start from multiple initial points and they roll downhill. And most algorithms on this problem will think that they've found, because they keep finding the same solution, they'll think that it looks like the first one. And so they don't even know what they don't know. They don't even know that there's actually other problems. Whereas the one on the left, they at least have an understanding. If they get a different solution every time, they at least understand that the landscape is quite rugged. So having seen just a few test problems, we can now try to understand what makes optimization problems difficult. Characteristics such as the ruggedness of the landscape, or whether there are flat plateaus, or whether there's dependency between variables, all contribute to whether an optimization problem is considered hard. Now, how are we going to see all of this if you've got more than 3D? Suppose it's a real supermarket problem and you've got thousands and thousands of products. It's a very high dimensional problem. How are we going to see that? So I want to skip through all the details because it's a public lecture, but I'm going to skip through all the details, but I want you to know that we have, in my research, created a thing called an instance space. That is a 2D projection of all functions that project to a point in the 2D plane based on their similarities and differences of those characteristics. So 2 points, 2 functions that end up being near each other are there because they have quite similar characteristics. So how do we do that? Very briefly, we use some statistical methods to estimate 8 characteristics based on a sample of points. So we have an 8-dimensional feature vector that summarizes a function. We then use some linear algebra techniques to project that to 2D. And then we can see the difficulty of the algorithm across the 2D instance space. We can see which algorithm should be used for which types of functions and why. Skipping all the detail, let me just show you the picture. So this is an instance space for those kinds of optimization problems. The blue points represent functions that everybody already studies, the ones that I just showed you before. That's where they live. So a point here, a blue point, is one of those functions, like the convex function that I showed you, or the one with the very rugged landscape. The red points are functions that we have evolved to imitate those functions, functions that we have generated to be like a clone of those well-known functions. And we did that to practice so that we could then explore the space. The green points are brand new functions that no one has studied yet, but we have created. We have evolved these functions to be quite unique and diverse. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today, these green functions. They're quite different from the ones that everybody has previously studied. Now, what do I mean by evolving functions? So hopefully you can see Charles Darwin in the corner there.
Yep.
Great. Charles Darwin, of course, had his theory of natural selection and survival of the fittest. And this, of course, is where individuals in the population are animal species and they become parents. They grow up, they're children, they grow up, they become adults, they become parents, and parents reproduce to create offspring. And those offspring combine the traits of the parents. And of course, there's some random mutations that happen along the way as well. But what happens with Charles Darwin's theory with survival of the fittest is that only the fittest offspring survive. Only they go on to become parents and pass on their superior genetic material to the next generation. And so what tends to happen over time is that the average fitness of the population is increasing over time because the weaker individuals are not part of that future. And so that's the survival of the fittest premise. So researchers in the 60s and 70s, so once we had computers being advanced, decided that we could imitate this process on computers with something called genetic programming. So how do we evolve mathematical functions using genetic programming. So inspired by this evolutionary process, now individuals are tree structures, a binary tree, a binary meaning there's two stems that come off every node. And a binary tree defines a mathematical function f of x, y. So this is a function of two variables, an x and a y. And here in the example, you can see what we do to, here's the x down the bottom here. X is divided by 11. We then subtract it from 2.2 and we have this left branch. Meanwhile, on the right branch, we have y that has a cos applied to it, which is multiplied by 7. And then we combine the two branches with a sum. So this is a function. And this is the tree structure that represents that function of two variables, x and y. So if that's an individual in my population, and we have a population of tree structures that become parents and that they create children by combining their branches, bits of this branch, bits of this branch. So you might get a child that takes this part of mum and this part of dad, and the weak child is just going to die off, but the strong child is going to survive and become a parent. And we have mutations that are applied randomly. And these trees only know very limited vocabulary. They only know arithmetic operators, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. They only know trigonometric operators like sine, cos, and hyperbolic tangent. They know about exponentials and they know about absolute values, but that's all they know, right? And so we ask a genetic program to evolve a population of functions using this language that gets fitter and fitter over time. Now, what do I mean by fitness? So fitness is evaluated based on something that I'm trying to improve. I choose it. I'll tell you what I choose in a minute. But let me just say that the weak functions are going to die out and the average fitness of the functions is going to improve. I'm going to get what I want in the end from the functions that I am seeking. And we simulate this evolutionary process over many, many generations in just seconds. So what is fitness in this world? What do I mean? What is my evolutionary goal? What I'm trying to create, remember my instance space with the green dots, I'm trying to find functions that live at target locations in my space. I want diversity. So if I say, give me a function that lives way out here where no one has ever explored a function before, then that's how I define the fitness of an individual. An individual tree structure, a function, is fit if it happens when I measure its 8-dimensional feature vector and project to 2D if it lives where I want it to live. So adding this diversity is what our goal is, and we measure the fitness based on distance to my target point in the instance space. And the fittest individual is the one that's closest to the target. And over time, what we're going to get are functions that live anywhere that I ask them to live. I might ask them to live right on top of the existing functions just to prove that I can do it, to replicate and clone existing functions, or I might ask for brand new functions in unexplored territory. So let's have a look first at some red functions so I can convince you that I can recreate an existing function to confirm the methodology. So looking at the top row here, focus on the one on the left. This is my target function. So think about what that actually looks like. Blue is the minimum. So it's almost like we have a thin river down the bottom and we have this terrace, this rice paddy terrace thing happening. I don't know if you can see the red bands here, slowly getting higher and higher. But down at the bottom of the river, there's a river with very steep slopes, steep banks. That's my target function. I want to start from random trees and I want to evolve over time a bunch of functions that have the same characteristics as that optimization problem. It's quite a hard optimization problem. I don't know if you can see carefully here, the darkest blue, it's not a continuous river. There's like little puddles of dark blue, right? So an optimization algorithm, you know, it's not a particularly challenging problem, but it's got certain characteristics. So the one in the middle, top row middle, is our best, fittest individual in the final population. It's pretty close. It's got a little curve in the river, but it's pretty much got the same characteristics. It would be equally difficult for an optimization algorithm. The one on the right is our worst individual in our final population. Still pretty good, still survived all the way through, but this is our worst individual in the final population. And you can see it's got many of the same characteristics. It's got two little hills on the other side of the river, but it's still pretty good. Okay, and then down the bottom is another test function. This is just that sphere, that bowl, that convex bowl, very easy problem. And the one in the middle is our best attempt to recreate that. It's pretty much the same thing. It's just shifted a little bit, but in terms of difficulty, it's the same kind of problem. And the one on the right is our worst individual. Well, you can see it's a little bit different from the target. It's a little bit wavy around here. So they're all basically a crater, but this one's got little wiggles in it. And the reason is when you have a look at the equation for this function here, you can see the reason for the wiggles. The target function might have just been the first 5 terms. You know, it's basically a quadratic bowl. But this function over here, the worst individual in my population has gone a bit rogue. He's introduced the language that we said he could use, the sine and cos and the exponentials, and he's really gone for it. Like, he's completely made a very complicated function that is very similar to this one, but just a little bit unique. Okay, so that's confirmation that the methodology basically works. We can get very close, and even when we're looking at our worst individual, it's still pretty close. So now we can set targets to be the green points, and we can say, okay, now give me a function that no one's ever studied before. And here's just a sample of some of the new functions that we've created that have such diversity. And you can see why they would be hard for optimization algorithms that are trying to find the darkest blue. There's lots of traps here. There's lots of ways that it might get stuck and converge and not find the darkest blue. So that was some research that we did, and we published that work. Got accepted a while ago, but it's only just appeared last month in the Evolutionary Computation Journal from MIT Press. And, you know, that's nice. From a mathematics perspective, we have demonstrated a methodology for generating brand new functions. We've contributed these functions to our research colleagues around the world. They can now test their optimization algorithms on quite diverse, interesting problems. And we hope that they will help to reveal strengths and weaknesses of a whole range of different optimization techniques. But the thing is, these functions are so beautiful that it seemed a shame just to hide them away in this journal paper that, frankly, not many people are probably going to read. Look how beautiful and intricate they are, especially when we change the color scale to max out at yellow. I don't particularly like the red. So we went from blue to yellow, and look how gorgeous these functions are. Such intricacy when you think that these are generated just by combining X's and Y's in very simple ways with a very simple vocabulary. It's quite astonishing to see the level of intricacy and complexity that can be created. So naturally enough, we decided that we wanted to show these to the world. And in particular, I wanted to print one for hanging on a wall. So just here's a few enlargements, and you can see the impact of the exponential functions that are permitted, and the hyperbolic tangent with its asymptotes. You can see how you create these structures with the limited vocabulary, the periodic structures of the trigonometric functions, and some of these look like what you'd look at like under a microscope or a sunset. They're quite beautiful. So that was the scientific motivation. Let's jump now to the artistic motivation. So Einstein and many people, of course, have acknowledged that science and art tend to coalesce. Sometimes the science is so beautiful that it becomes artwork. I think that's how I felt about this. And so the question became, which one should I print? And I couldn't decide. I have too many favorites. And so I started asking people. We shortlisted to 306 beautiful images. And when I started asking people, anyone who visited my office, I would say, which ones do you like best? And in the end, we decided to put them in a sort of random array here, just so that people could see them all at a glance. It turned out that no one has a particular favorite, and people started suggesting that maybe we want to see all of them, like their diversity is quite special and quite a statement. So then the question became, okay, let's do a montage. This is a 17 by 18 array of the 306 chosen images. What is the most aesthetically pleasing arrangement of these functions? So, well, this turns out to be quite subjective, what people find aesthetically pleasing. It really depends on the value that a person places between order versus randomness, and whether they're looking for global structure, whether they're looking at big picture or the detail. it was quite fascinating to start talking to people about their aesthetic taste, and for me to make a few little observations about people's personalities and the relationship between their taste and their personality, given that I was asking people I know. So what I'm going to do now is just take you on a little 10-minute diversion to talk about beauty and aesthetics. It's been quite a fascinating learning journey for me these last few weeks. I've learned quite a lot about aesthetics. So let me just share with you some of this. So early musings on what beauty is goes back to the ancient Greeks. So we have Plato and Aristotle. Aristotle was Plato's student. They disagreed on lots of things. They did agree that beauty was an objective measure of an object. Nothing subjective about it. This is an object and it has the properties of beauty. They disagreed. Plato felt that beauty was an ideal of perfection, probably from the heavens, that we on earth could never recreate. Whereas Aristotle really believed that earthly objects could be beautiful if they had the right properties, order and symmetry and definiteness, and of course mathematics he appreciated. And you know, then we had the whole ancient Greek school with the golden ratio and all this kind of stuff. These thoughts about what beauty is and its objectivity in terms of absolute terms persisted right through to the Renaissance. And so we have Leonardo da Vinci, for instance, with Vitruvian Man here, that has the golden ratio proportions of the different parts of the anatomy. We had allegedly Leonardo's wife, Mona Lisa, who apparently this picture has something to do with the golden ratio in terms of the width of her face to the width of the painting and various things. It's all very controversial. And of course, that notion that the human face, beautiful faces have a golden ratio proportion in many of the dimensions is something that there's a plastic surgeon in California called Dr. Marquardt, and he has something called the Marquardt mask that he applies over someone's face and suggests little changes that you could make to your face to become more aesthetically pleasing by imposing a golden ratio proportion. So I won't go into it now. It's another whole talk. You can check my website for this talk. But that's the Marquardt mask applied to my face, which when stretched to become more beautiful, makes me look like an alien. But, you know, this is the objective measure of beauty as according to the golden ratio. I think we can disagree and acknowledge that perhaps beauty is a subjective thing. So moving on to something that actually is quite beautiful. Here is the fresco by Raphael in 1511, the School of Athens, where he was paying tribute to the ancient Greeks and their ideals of beauty. Here we have Plato in the middle and Aristotle. They disagreed. There's a left side and a right side to this fresco. Over on the left side, we have Pythagoras, who was more Platonic. And on the right side, Euclid, who was a bit more of an Aristotle guy. And when you zoom in on Plato and Aristotle, you find that Raphael put the faces of his contemporaries here. We have the face of Leonardo da Vinci playing the role of Plato and the face of Michelangelo playing the role of Aristotle. They too were feuding, had very different opinions about things, and Raphael was their contemporary. And in this fresco, he's really saying a lot about the relationship between philosophy, science, and the arts. So people have thought for a long time about beauty, and it wasn't until the 18th century that we started to get the notion that beauty perhaps is in the eye of the beholder. It's more of a relative concept. We had great philosophers like Immanuel Kant, who in 1790 wrote the book Critique of Aesthetic Judgment, and we started to get this word or this notion of aesthetics, and that it may be personal taste, or really it's like everything, all space and time, everything is a construct of your own mind and your own reality. So we find in the 19th century then, the great German psychological tradition begins of experimenting on humans to try to understand individual variations, and Gustav Fechner and his colleagues developed the field of experimental aesthetics, where they tried to talk to people about what they find beautiful. And from this tradition comes this idea of hedonic analysis, where we try to understand the feelings and emotions that individuals have in response to artwork. or cognitive analysis, where we consider the impact of their knowledge and their understanding. And then, of course, in more recent times, this century, the field of neuroaesthetics is emerging, where people can actually look at the human brain and what's happening inside your brain when you're being stimulated by some visual art or some music. So it's all very fascinating. Now, I want to spend 5 minutes talking about beauty as a mathematician means the word beauty, because this is something different again. What do mathematicians find beautiful? We often find mathematicians describing a mathematical argument or a proof as beautiful. You often see referees' reports describing it as a beautiful proof. What does that mean? And non-mathematicians find that a little bit strange. How can a piece of mathematics be beautiful? Terry Tao, in this paper, What is Good Mathematics, suggests that there are about 20 different dimensions that define good mathematics, and beauty is one of them, along with elegance and rigor and creativity and other things. There was this very interesting study done recently that tries to understand what beautiful means to a mathematician. And so they surveyed 255 mathematicians. They put out a much bigger call, but 255 people agreed to participate, where they were asked to think of their favorite mathematical proof and rank the proof based on, ranked 80 different adjectives when they think of that proof. So the adjectives were things like, you know, beauty and elegance and simplicity and all these kinds of words. And there was a statistical analysis done where they used principal component analysis and they looked at correlations. And basically, they summarized that every proof that was studied can be described as a point in a four-dimensional space where the four axes are an aesthetic dimension, to do with its elegance or its creativity, an intricacy dimension that had simplicity and confusion at opposite ends of that scale, a utility dimension of how practical this is, and a precision dimension. But every proof could be pinpointed by its degree to which it had these different dimensions. The interesting thing is that beauty was aligned to the aesthetic dimension, and simplicity was aligned to the intricacy dimension, as you'd expect. When they did the correlation analysis, mathematicians did not think there was a correlation between beauty and simplicity, right? So when a mathematician says something is beautiful, it's got nothing to do with simplicity. Beauty was strongly correlated with adjectives like elegant, pleasing, ingenious, inspired, enlightening, and creative. All these things made a proof beautiful. But the thing is that the Oxford Dictionary definition of elegance is the quality of being pleasingly ingenious and simple. So that's a bit strange. We have a contradiction here, that to mathematicians, beauty means elegance, but to everyone else, elegance means simplicity. But for mathematicians, simplicity doesn't create elegance or beauty. So it seems that what is elegant to a mathematician can include a lot of complexity without necessarily detracting from its beauty. And the reason I mention that is because it's been long studied, the role of complexity and order in aesthetics. So I really love this quote from Rudolf Arnheim in 1972 in his collected essays towards the psychology of art. Order and complexity cannot exist without each other. And this, complexity without order produces confusion, and order without complexity produces boredom. So we have to balance order and complexity, and people have known that for quite some time. But I guess the question is, how much is an individual's personal, their personality and their personal preferences at play when they consider what the right balance is between order and complexity? And because when I'm constructing my montage, I have to balance order and complexity if I want it to be aesthetically pleasing. So we keep doing the research and we keep investigating. Studies have shown that people's perception of aesthetic value of art is influenced by some subjective things, their individual preferences for complexity and order. So for instance, the amount and variety of elements in the artwork, the way that they're organized. And there's this interesting notion of unity in variety, that sometimes if there's so much variety, we might need a unifying device to help link it all together. And symmetry or asymmetry is also a question of maybe individual preferences. And then there's some objective measures of the objects, you know, a bit like a Platonic idea, that people tend to agree on, such as color combinations that are more appealing, balance points, spatial properties of objects. But there's a lot of personal preference involved. And so we get this field of aesthetic science emerging, where there's been predictive models that have been built that can take an individual, understand their preference for complexity and order, and predict whether they will find something aesthetic. But of course, your cognitive state and your knowledge and your understanding has a lot to do with how you handle complexity. And we might see a particular type there with mathematicians appreciating mathematical complexity. And your emotional state has some impact as well, not just on order, but also on complexity. It's all tangled together. It's such a mess. You know, this is this confusion and boredom thing. This is your emotional state, how it's affected by this balance between complexity and order. And then, of course, we have to ask the question, well, how does your actual individual personality affect any of these things? So people have predictably looked at the role of personality in order to disorder preference. Personality traits have been shown to correlate with aesthetic taste. These are known as the big 5 personality traits. We all have them on a spectrum, on a scale. I know which ones I have strongly, like the top 3. But there's also some other personality traits that have been shown to correlate with aesthetic taste as well. And if you're sitting there wondering where you sit on this order to disorder preference, let me just ask you whether you could work quite comfortably at the desk on the left, or you would have to clean it before you could actually complete a job and make it look like the one on the right. And that might tell you somewhere about where you might sit in the order disorder preference. So back to our on montage. That was my whirlwind history of aesthetics. Now, how do I use any of this to make the most aesthetic montage? We have to balance order and complexity. That much is clear. So we surveyed with 10 random images. Here's a random image. I asked 50 of my friends and colleagues, went on Facebook, anyone who came to my office, family, I showed them 10 different random arrangements of the montage. And I asked them which one they preferred. Actually, no one liked any of them. True random, it turns out, appeals to no one. When you randomly place 306 images, there is a probability you are going to get some little structures emerging. See this blue cross here? And there's also a bit of a blue cross down here, and there's a block of 3 dark blues here. You know, that happens. There's a probability that things will happen when you randomly allocate, but people didn't like that. People didn't like this blue cross that didn't go anywhere. It's like it could be connected to this blue line that continues down, but it didn't. And that's frustrating and annoying. And then some people didn't want to be distracted with having their eye drawn to particular blue dominant areas. So some people preferred to see global structure created by this sort of connecting blue river idea, and they expressed disappointment when it didn't quite happen. It stopped abruptly. So they're looking for an order at a macro level. They want to understand through the complexity. They want to see a macro structure. And then there were other people who preferred for it to look more random than random was. You know, random isn't necessarily what humans expect random to be. You can Google Benford's law to see. So true random, there's a probability that we're going to get some structures here that people actually don't like. They don't like the distraction. You know, for an example, my daughter, who is very artistic, she found this one to be hideous. The word was hideous. And what I was proposing to do with it by creating blue rivers, she found to be cheap and insulting, because it's like, I think that she needs this global structure imposed to be able to make sense of the complexity. She wanted to see something that was even more random than random. In other words, please make it completely disordered so that she can appreciate the complexity in the array as a whole without having her eye drawn to something that we're manipulating and trying to draw her eye to. So this notion of beauty as unity and variety, or order and complexity, I think is a very interesting one, because it's not necessarily that people prefer order or disorder, but it's the scale at which they're looking for the order that I think is important. Are you looking for order at a macro level, or you want to appreciate at the micro level detail, and the order of the grid is sufficient to do that? So here's a new artistic intention then. It was fascinating to observe this relationship between personality traits and their order disorder preference and their aesthetic taste, and to ask at what scale people seek order. So new goal, no longer aiming to select the most aesthetic image or to construct the most aesthetic montage that's going to satisfy the most people. Instead, I think we have an opportunity to actually make a statement here. And we now want to create an artwork that conveys the observation that aesthetic taste is actually a spectrum that reflects the preference from disorder to order, depending on how you define order. So the method then to create this artwork was then to start with random and do some manual swaps of the images by eye, by human eye, artistic eye, to try to either enhance or destroy those blue river structures that were either appealing to people or offensive to people. So now we get to the making of the artwork, negentropy triptych. Why is it called that? Entropy means a lack of order or predictability, a gradual decline into disorder. And negentropy is the reverse, order emerging from disorder, the negative. So what we have here in the middle is a random arrangement of the 306 images that has some annoying little substructures that got accidentally created. And on the right, about 30 swaps of individual images to try to have that blue river connectivity continue and go somewhere and have a degree of satisfaction for those who are looking for that blue river connectedness. And then on the left, about 30 swaps to break it up, to destroy these kind of partial structures and just make it look more random. But really, it's just complete lack of order, lack of structure. So that's the artwork. Negentropy triptych. Last year, we had a digital unveiling at the Ian Potter Museum of Art last month. And that's all great. But being an optimization researcher, it's pretty natural for me to ask whether or not an optimization algorithm could do what I did with my human eye better. Could it do it more aesthetically pleasing and faster? So the aim now of a scientific exercise is to find an optimal placement of the 306 images that maximize or minimize blue river connectedness, however we measure that. So the method then, we're going to start with an initial random montage, the same one. We are going to extract the dark enough blue regions as a binary. So that's what this looks like here. So every image has blue and then dark blue. I think our eye is drawn to the dark blue. That's what we're looking for with the rivers. So let's define dark enough as a certain number. You know, the blue is from 0 to 255. So let's define it. I think it's around 200. And if it's blue, dark blue enough, then it gets recorded here as white. So you can see we've got this dark blue block here that shows up as this white block here. If it's not dark blue enough, it's just black. We don't see it. So we're going to work on this black and white binary. And what we have is a greedy algorithm that is seeking to do some swaps. And if it improves our global measure of blue river connectivity, we will accept it. Otherwise, we won't accept the swap. And the swaps we do, we can randomly choose to swap 2 images anywhere in the picture. So it's a global random swap. And we can focus on an image and we can swap it with its neighbors, its left, right, top and bottom neighbors. And we can also take an image and flip it horizontally or vertically. So we've got 7 types of swaps that we permit, where we're swapping, trying to maximize the total area of the connected blue region. So we're going to start with some large already connected regions, and then we're going to propose to do some swaps that are going to increase the total area of the connected blue. So here's a video. So we start with some initial connected blue regions. And as the algorithm proceeds, this is just the first 1,000 iterations. But as the algorithm proceeds, you can see the algorithm working really hard to join more and more areas together. So if you look down the bottom left here, there's a bit here and a bit here. Is it going to join them together as the algorithm proceeds? It's trying to find some images to swap around that's going to create bridges between these blocks of blue. There we go. There's a bit of a connection joining these bits in here. That's just the first 1,000 iterations. And let's just jump ahead to after 20,000 iterations, this is the end result. Now, I don't know about you, but I look at that and I don't think that's as good as my blue river system. That's not satisfying to me, to my eye, but that's what the algorithm did with what we told it to do. What did we tell it to do? Maximize the area of the blue river stuff. We didn't really tell it about diagonals and the kinds of things that I was looking at with my eye. we gave it a shot. In the end, this is the algorithm as an artist after 20,000 swaps of the left and right. And this was our negentropy triptych, where the human is the artist. Only took 30 swaps, I should say. And so I'll let you be the judge of which one you find more aesthetically appealing. I understand everyone has personal taste, but I might be biased, but I prefer the human as the artist there. Of course, we probably haven't been fair to the algorithm. There's much more we could tell it. It's only done what we told it to do. So are we scientists, or are we artists, or are we both? Einstein thinks that we're all both. And, you know, I think whether you prefer the artist as the human as artist, or you prefer the algorithm as artist, in the end, we wrote the algorithm. We gave it the rules. So we're in control of that as well. So, you know, there's a little bit of Frida or Pablo in all of us. I think, you know, musicians add beauty to the world by their music, and poets add beauty to the world by their words. But I think mathematicians, apart from using mathematics to improve the world, we can also add a bit of beauty to it as well. So that's where I will stop. And I'd like to acknowledge the ARC for supporting the mathematics research that went into creating this artwork. I've offered them a poster that they're going to display at the ARC offices in Canberra. But I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. That was quite an extraordinary talk, and there are some questions and answers which I'll ask in well, some questions which I'll pose in a minute. But I'm just going to pose one right at the beginning and wonder what the negentropy triptych will be worth in a few years' time.
At the moment, I'm giving it away. So yeah, I feel that acquisition.
Kate with Miles and Acosta. All right. There's a few questions, and I'll just go through. So some people have made one. There was a comment very early about your color scale, the blue and yellow, which you sort of mentioned later on. So
yeah, that's just personal taste. I didn't like the red. I found the red a bit too bold. So I think when you go blue to yellow, it looks nicer. I don't know the name of the color scale in MATLAB. Andres, my colleague, did all the coding, but I'm sure it's just one of the standard ones. Can I answer Chris's question about why the instance space is apparently constrained?
Certainly, yeah.
It's a great question. Yeah. You're right, Chris, the instance space is constrained. When you think about what the instance space is created by, it's a projection from the higher dimensional feature space. In our case, for this particular problem, eight dimensional space. Every one of those 8 features has an upper and lower bound, right? So if we take the upper and lower bound of every feature in the 8-dimensional space and we project to 2D, we get a bounding region in the 2D space. This is our theoretical boundary, where we believe that test functions can theoretically exist. Whether we have them yet is another matter, but that theoretical boundary guides our setting of target points. We want to be able to fill. There's no point setting a target outside the boundary. You'll never converge. You'll never find a function that lives out there. But yeah, that theoretical boundary is a mathematical thing, and it's very useful to understand the diversity we have and how much extra diversity we could get.
So, Kate, you can see the questions. Maybe I'll let you decide which ones and which order you want to answer them, or do you want me to organise?
Maybe we can team while one person's reading, one person's talking. It
so
takes a while to read through some of them.
Darren, who early on asked about, you made a comment looking for test functions that can expose weaknesses in an algorithm. And he observed that you generally don't know what the weaknesses are. So how do you fit functions to expose weaknesses?
I guess you're just making sure that you generate enough diverse functions that you have a chance of seeing a weakness. You're not taking an algorithm, understanding its weakness, and then deliberately designing a function to expose that. Having said that, we have done that. So we have in our past work evolved functions not to be diverse in their location, but we've evolved functions that are super hard or super easy for a certain algorithm. And the way you do that is just through your choice of fitness function. You make the fitness function. You can't evaluate a function. You can't evaluate an individual unless you run an algorithm and know whether or not it found it performed well or poorly. And then if you want to create more and more functions that an algorithm performs badly at, you can do that. You just got to change your fitness function.
Okay, we've got another one. Did you only do it with two independent variables?
No. So in the paper that we published, we had 20-dimensional functions as well. But of course, we don't get the beautiful contour plot. So this talk, which is about the artwork, is only on the 2D functions. But in the paper, we had 20D functions, and we've also looked at even higher dimensions as well.
Okay, and we had Tyler, who's in Georgia Tech, observed that you got a great range with some fairly simple arithmetic functions. And could you get, well, I guess the question she asked is, she or he, I'm not sure. Do you think a similar approach can be used for something more complex like integer programming?
Tyler, do you mean could we evolve diverse integer programming problems? Yes, and we have been doing that, trying to, stress test integer programming methods. We wouldn't be using a binary tree representation because we're not really evolving a function. Most of the time, you're just evolving coefficients of a structure. AX less than or equal to B, you're evolving the A and the B, and you're evolving what the cost function could be. But yeah, there's certainly for the function part, you could use a binary tree. Yeah, but I mean, look how much complexity was generated with such a simple vocabulary. You can imagine if you threw the full power of mathematics at it, how astonishing it could become.
So Rob had a question about when you ask people for their thoughts, was there a sort of correlation between your evaluation of people's personalities and what they said? Yes,
there was. So, I mentioned my daughter, very artistic, creative type. And I respect her artistic opinion a lot. And she was preferring the left. And then without naming people, I'll just name myself. I preferred the Blue River structure because when you talk about those big 5 personality traits, I'm a little bit neurotic and a little bit conscientious, and I like the neat desk. I could not work at a messy desk. And so, I think that kind of, you like things to be a certain way, you like some structure, correlates with people who prefer the right image. But it was very clear. I mean, so in the 50 friends that I surveyed, it was pretty much 50-50 split. And when I looked at the list, I thought, actually, I could have predicted that, whether you're a left or a right. I could have predicted. Yeah.
Maybe you should get into the psychology business.
Yeah, well, it's quite fascinating. That was just an informal survey, and I'm not at all interested in doing proper, psychometrics. But yeah, it was really fascinating to discover that it's not just me making this stuff up. There's all this literature. Like there's so much literature in the psychology field on all of this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Someone's asked, anonymous person, can you reverse engineer? So if you've got an image, can you work out how you might have got it? I guess from some random starting point or something.
Yeah. So if you've got the image, then you know the function value for any XY point. And so that's really no different to evolving what the function is that, well, I guess surrogate modeling would be the classic way of handling that. You could fit a surrogate model, you could give it enough flexibility that it might be a clone for the original function.
Yeah. You've got a bunch of people saying very nice things about your talk, Kate, which I completely agree with.
Thank you.
Andy Horvath has asked, how much does the brain fill in the blue rivers to make shapes we respond to, like faces or hearts?
Sorry, what was that question? And how much does the brain?
How
much does the brain fill in the blue rivers to make shapes? Yes. Well, so some people found the image on the right some people called it the little fishies. On Facebook, people would say, "Oh, I prefer the one on the right with the little fishies." My daughter, who was offended by the one on the right, felt that it was kindergarten-like and insulting to think that people would only appreciate the complexity in the artwork if there were little kindergarten fishies drawn. So, I didn't see them as fish. I just saw them as blue rivers. But then again, I'm approaching it from an optimization perspective. Every one of those images has a blue river through it where the global minima lie. And all we're doing is creating a macro structure where there's connectivity between all the blue. I see it as a giant landscape. I don't see it as fish. But we all see what we want to see. And yes, some people might see hearts or faces. It's like when we look at the clouds, we all see different things in the shape of the clouds.
So we've got a question from Yanda here. Do you think the sense of beauty would change if you used a different color scheme?
Well, my personal taste drove me to get rid of the red. Maybe somebody else would appreciate the red. It maybe would be bold and striking. I found it a bit too,
But it may be a different question. If you use red instead of yellow and then ask the questions about, say, the blue rivers, would you get the same answer?
Yeah, and I think the eye is drawn to the dark blue just because of the choice of the other colors. If you had a different color palette, what would your eye be drawn to? I don't know. If red was in there, would your eye be drawn to the red and would you be looking for the red to speak to you? I'm not sure.
So you haven't done the experiment of using the different color scheme and then doing the same thing all over again?
No, but I think we can see when we do that black and white binary, there's nothing appealing about that.
Yeah, sure.
That wasn't nice.
Is a quite an important one, I think. Vicky Huang has asked, do you think it's important for people in the STEM to communicate research in alternative ways that extends beyond the STEM community?
Yeah, I do, of course. I do, and these public lectures are part of that effort. I think when, what I like about the opportunity to present this work is not just about showing some pretty pictures, but introducing to people the idea that the stuff you learned in high school, this functions, finding the stationary points of functions or finding the roots of a function. You've seen this before, and it's not that much further to look at the kind of optimization that you learn at university, to look at the kind of optimization that's used to solve really practical, important problems in the world. But also, if it helps people get curious and interested, to approach it from a perspective of how beautiful are these functions, I'm now curious about how they were generated. So much beautiful visual art is mathematically based, like, obviously fractals and things like that. Such simple mathematics that sometimes that's all somebody needs to become curious about wanting to learn more mathematics. And I think that's really important. Yeah.
There's quite a lot of questions about colors, and I guess people working in visualization have got a lot of thoughts about that.
Yeah, the yellow haters out there, someone's talked about. And of course, colorblind is a big consideration. When we publish our papers and we have some images, in fact, this week we're revising a paper where the referee said that the choice of colors might be a problem. And we've said, well, we've gone for a color palette that is appropriate for colorblind people and will also look okay when printed in black and white. And it's hard to get contrasting colors. MATLAB does have a color palette that's appropriate for printing in black and white and also colorblind palettes. But yes, I'm not sure how colorblind people would find this artwork. That was not motivating
So we've got a question from Jason White, which is a mathematical one. And I think I might know the answer to this, but can the services have discontinuities and could you accommodate that?
Well, given the vocabulary that we gave it, we have hyperbolic tangent, which has asymptotic properties. So now do I have any images that show that kind of behavior? Yes, we do. We have some very sharp edges. So if you have a look at some of the images, anywhere that you've got blue right next to yellow, we are going from a super low value to a super high value instantaneously. So that's a discontinuity, right? And there's lots of images that have blue right next to yellow. If they're not necessarily a smooth, gradual change through the color spectrum, there's some very sharp edges there. So yes, I believe hyperbolic tangent is responsible for having created those kinds of sharp, almost discontinuities. Plus we have absolute value as well.
Okay. Someone's asked, is it possible to expose your work, I guess, plastic arts in a blind peer review and collect feedback, an art contest?
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know what plastic arts is.
Yeah, I don't. But I guess an art contest, let's
but
imagine.
Art contest, well, without wanting to jinx any results, we have submitted this work to an art contest. The University of Newcastle has a mathematics in art competition that we submitted this to several months ago. I haven't heard anything yet. But yeah, I think there's also plenty of other things. There's the Bridges conference that connects mathematics and art together. If we wanted to, once the world opens up again, if we wanted to travel the world talking about negentropy triptych, I'm sure there's plenty of places that we could get some exposure. But I'm quite content just to give a public lecture for ACEMS, to have something printed on my office wall, try to get the local museums on campus to display it sometimes, and use it as a talking point for how amazing mathematics is.
Yeah. There's quite a few other questions about choice of colors and choice of functions and what we're trying to maximize. And some people have suggested you could have the thing changing in time. I guess that makes it a different sort of artwork, doesn't it? But
yeah,
of interesting thing. There's lots of interesting pathways.
Yes, I'll just quickly answer the question from Yifan Go about, have you considered designing another algorithm to maximize randomness? We are currently, I pushed Mario Andres, my colleague, pretty hard overnight to get the left image there for the algorithm. We're submitting a paper to a journal due next week. The journal is called Entropy. They've got a special issue on mathematics and art, and we thought this was too perfect, but we need to have an algorithm that considers entropy. So, we're looking for new ideas, maybe not maximizing the area of the blue connected regions, but maximizing and minimizing entropy. Having said that, it's not what I did with my eye. What I did with my eye was I looked for the blue rivers. It's very hard to tell an algorithm exactly how to do that. But yeah, we have lots of ideas that we're considering of how to really break up any structure that might be accidentally there.
Okay, Kate. Well, we've actually gone over time, but I have to say that was one of the absolute best public lectures that I've ever had the pleasure of listening to, and having to do it over Zoom and see the images on the computer has made it. It was challenging, but I think it worked very well. So on behalf of everyone, I'd just like to thank you for the lecture today. It has been recorded, I believe, and should be available on the ACEMS webpage relatively soon. So well done, Kate, and thanks very much.
Great. Thank you, everyone.